Well, now that we've all got our jollies off and we've been celebrating for the past week that Donald Trump and the Republican Party had a major landslide victory, not only in the Senate and the House, but also in the presidency with Donald Trump taking the election, it is time for us all to come back to reality for a second. I hate to be the one to do it, but I feel like it's my obligation and my moral duty to do so. So, on today's episode, we are going to indeed be talking about the fact that the church has failed America. Not only in this election, but in many, many elections before that and all the way leading up until now in the 21st century. The church has failed at its duty to be a light on a hill and to be a light to lighten the darkness. So, we're going to talk about all that today, so stay tuned. Welcome to Principled Politics, and today we're going to cut through the commentary. Well, like I said in the intro, today's episode is going to be concerning the church. Now, it is no surprise that the church, in many ways, has failed. This is something that's been going on for decades now. Many elections, they have failed to show up in big droves and have allowed great harm to be done to the culture. But what does it look like now that Donald Trump and the Republicans have had their victory? They've won. What does that look like for us moving forward? What is the future and the hope for America? Well, 4 years isn't a long time. 4 years is enough time for a president to do many things, but one of those things is not to shift the culture and the future of America for decades and decades to come. Presidents do many great things, and I believe that Donald Trump will do great things to effectuate change. He will rein back in the conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine and Russia. He will help us to grow a thriving economy, but it is our job as Americans to sustain those things. You see, a country can only go so far as its culture allows it to go. And so looking at this today, we're going to look at what our future is and what is the hope of our future. You know, the culture is a grassroots effort. Culture is reflective of what people at a very core level believe. If we have sexual promiscuity and we have rampant sexuality, that's because the people at the bottom have been exposed to that, and they in part begin to act in that way. If we have hedonism, it's because people are beginning to want hedonism. We as the American people have the power to shift the culture, and that is where the church comes into play. And so looking at our founding is one of Christian tenets. Our founding is one of Christian principles. We don't get America without Christianity. We don't get our rights and our privileges as Americans without Christianity and without our founding fathers implementing their faith into practice. And even the ones who didn't have that faith, Thomas Jefferson himself being one of them, still respected the values that came from it and was not naive enough to understand that people need religion and that Christianity is a religion that brings good morals and virtues to the forefront. To prove that point to you guys, we're going to take a look here at the Declaration of Independence. Why are we looking at the Declaration of Independence? Well, I'm glad you asked. The Declaration of Independence, in my opinion, is the core founding document of our country. We don't get the Constitution without the Declaration of Independence. Many people skip to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and then they skip to all those things and think that, that is the core foundation of our country. But in a sense, yes. But the cornerstone is the Declaration of Independence. And in that declaration, we can see those core tenets and those core principles that come from Christianity. So we're going to pull it up here on the screen, and we're going to take a second to read through it, to look at that, and then we're going to explain why the church has failed in upholding these principles and conserving our traditional values and the biblical and moral values that we have as Americans. So let's take a look here. Let's transition and look at that. So here it is. We're going to break this down in sections, and we're going to talk about each part. And I'll pause throughout to give details about the importance of each part. So let's start here in the beginning. In Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 states the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind require that they should declare the cause which impel them to separation. So pausing here in this first section here, that point there, the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. That in and of itself carries so much weight to the reality. What was the point that they were making? Was this just some appeal to a random abstract deity? A lot of people make the argument, why didn't they just explicitly say Jesus Christ? Or why didn't they explicitly just come out and say Christianity? Well, a part of that has to do with the fact that the point they get at, the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, it is the fact that what they are pointing towards is something that they believe to be so self-evident in the morality that God has instituted in man, in being made in his image, that any man can see it. That it is the laws of nature that God has instituted that should compel them to desire this separate and equal station. And a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. And so they go on later to explain why the causes compelled them to separate, but it wasn't the causes themselves that caused them to separate. It was the morality and the laws of nature that they felt compelled by that caused them to separate. So, for example, if all the founders were a bunch of atheists, they wouldn't have the grounds to be able to separate, because where's the morality from? Where are they getting their standard of wrongness from? And see, if you don't have that standard, it dissolves into chaos. And that has been the story of America over the past decades. We have lost our standard of righteousness. We have lost our standard of morality. And the founders understood that that standard and that law of nature and the nature and nature's God who entitled them those things is the standard on which this declaration should be founded. And so I love that they opened with that. And I think that that's important. Moving on here, we'll only read a few more sentences here because I think that we'll be able to get the point here. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shewn that among mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same objects, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. And then they continue on to list out the facts of how the government abused their rights and withheld them in absolute tyranny. The point is made. The founders did not declare themselves independent just because. They did not declare themselves independent of Britain just because they felt like it, just because they, felt that Britain was being rude to them or being mean. It was based on principle. And ironically, I titled, our media company Principled Politics due to that fact, because there needs to be a return to principle. And that principle is founded in the truths of God's word. So bringing this back to the church. The church has failed America. The church has failed America by not being the stronghold that it was supposed to be. The stronghold of America is supposed to be our churches, our religious institutions that are supposed to keep us grounded in those principles and those values and those morals that our founder spoke of. I encourage you now, search up how many times the founders, George Washington, John Adams, even Thomas Jefferson, someone who wasn't an ardent believer of Christianity, understood and emphasized the importance of having a people that attended church, having a people that focused on their faith and understood these principles and values. They understood that that was the moral fabric that would hold together our society. And so with that being said, I want to point to the sad reality that Christians in this election and many other elections have denied themselves the ability to be that light on the hill that Jesus has called them to be, have denied themselves the ability to have the influence in which Jesus has called them to. Pulling up a study here. A study by the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University revealed that in this election, 41 million self-identified Christians are choosing not to vote. Many have bought into this lie that, elections are meaningless. The world is meaningless. It's all going down. Damnation is coming. There's no point to even save America. There's no point to save the future. They see their purpose as solely spiritual, solely heavenly, something that's above and mystical. And they, refuse to be a light on earth and to confront wickedness as Jesus did. They have this apathetic attitude towards our nation. And I believe that this is contrary to everything that Jesus Christ preached. All of this centers around abortion. The main point of this video that I'm making here is because in this election cycle, multiple states enacted abortion laws. These laws, by far, are radical. Even if you're watching this and there's someone who maybe doesn't find yourself religious, or you don't attend church, you don't claim yourself to be Christian, even by some people's standards who aren't religious, these are radical. Here in Arizona, for example, Proposition 139 legalized abortion up to 24 weeks. Now, I want you to take the time now to search up a 24-year-old weak baby in the womb. Now, if you are someone who can see that photo of a 24-year-old weak baby and you deem that as not a human, then I want you to tell me what it is. My point exactly, many people can't. And that's the disturbing reality. Abortion amendments passed in 7 states here in this election. We had Arizona, Colorado, Maryland, Missouri, Montana, Nevada, and New York. Now, some of those aren't surprising. For example, New York, Maryland, Colorado. However, some of them are very disappointing. Arizona, Missouri, Montana, Nevada, places in which, we had Arizona go towards the Republican candidates. However, they still wanted abortion. We had places like Nevada, which went Republican, but still voted for abortion. Places like Montana, which are clearly conservative places, still voted for abortion. Places that didn't vote for it, thank goodness, are Florida, Nebraska, and South Dakota. But the point needs to be made, how do we get to this place where you have people who vote Republican and vote in this conservative aspect, but still vote for something that's so contrary, or used to be so contrary, to the conservative platform and towards what the conservative platform used to conserve, which was Christian traditional values? Well, a lot of that has to do with the church. I don't blame Republicans. I don't blame the conservative platform. I don't really necessarily think that. I do think it is their job to represent this issue. But at the end of the day, this is something that can truly only be blamed on the people who were put on this earth, the institution that was put on this earth to be a light for people, which is the church. And the reason I hold them to that standard is because myself being a Christian, I hold them to that higher standard because of their call and the fact that the Holy Spirit is supposed to embody them and supposed to empower them to live a holy life and to speak out against darkness and evil. So looking here, I want to pull up a few articles that I found fascinating, statistics that we need to look at when it comes to this and need to address and speak out against and vocalize. Here's the first one I want to look at. Here's a statistic. It was in May and June of 2024, a national survey was made, and this is what the survey found. The question was, should pastors endorse politicians from the pulpit? And the results of this are astounding. From the results, a new survey says that the vast majority of evangelical leaders, 98% of pastors say that they should not endorse politicians from the pulpit. And then here's a quote. It says, "The pulpit should be used in a prophetic manner, bringing the gospel to bear on today's complex cultural issues," said Walter Kim, president of the National Association of Evangelicals. Church leaders should inform, uplift, and draw people into deeper discipleship that impacts how they engage in their communities, including how they vote. Endorsing a political candidate is rarely helpful and most often breeds division. Here's another quote. It says, "Pastors are called to stay centered on biblical truth. In doing so, they can provide perspective on the issues relevant to their time. They should challenge congregants to study the scripture and support leadership based on what they believe to be true." And this article goes on in this manner. But the point is that 98% of evangelical pastors, I understand, right, the aspect of not specifically endorsing a candidate. But the problem is that most pastors use this as a way to clear themselves in this. They find ways where they don't have to be politically incorrect. They don't have to choose sides. They can just say, "Hey guys, you just figure it out for yourself." And this is a complete abandonment of the call of being a pastor. Being a pastor is being the first among many. It is being the first to lead themselves in a fire. It is being the first to, lead the way by example. And in doing that, you can clearly and evidently speak out against a platform. For me, I don't find it any way possible in which a person a pastor can read the Bible, adhere to Jesus' preachings, adhere to his teachings, and proclaim that it is okay for their congregants to vote for a platform that supports abortion, supports castrating children, supports an open border, crime, and supports violence and war across the world. Maybe not supports it, but allows it and has been weak to allow it. All those things are clearly against what God desires for our nation and the founding principles that we spoke of here in the Declaration of Independence. The point used to be that when our country was founded, many of the political leaders used to at the same time be church leaders. Many of the people who led in government were the first to lead in church. And we have bought into this lie of separation of church and state. And a lot of this has to do with some of the really corrupt and weird things that the church has given into in accepting these tax breaks. So I want to show you where I think a lot of this, I don't want to say stems from, but an issue that I see is clearly evident, and it's always related to money. Now, there's many churches who don't want to risk, having money taken away from them. They don't want to risk losing money. And even the biggest churches that have money for days, that have millions of dollars, still don't want to risk having their tax exemptions taken away. So here's an article from the Christian Post, and it's talking about what pastors and churches can legally do during election seasons. And so going through this article, here's some critical facts that you need to know. This is reading from the article. Here's some critical facts you need to know. 4 things churches and pastors are legally allowed to do during elections. So this is what they're legally allowed to do. It's okay to speak about political issues in the church. So you can give the context, right? You could talk about the issues. Religious leaders can educate their congregation about politics. They can invite political candidates to even speak at the church. As long as all candidates are included. So you can't invite one candidate and not other candidates. Pastors can participate in politics in their individual capacity. What can they not do, though? And this is where I think the church has some issues here. I always say that you want a one-way ticket to corruption and towards losing out on your freedoms, just take money from the government. Money from the government never comes without strings attached. This is what religious leaders cannot do during elections. This is according to the IRS regulations. And when they're a 501c3 organization, they cannot do the following. A church entity may not endorse one candidate over another. This does not mean that the pastor can't in his individual capacity, but the organization itself, church may not endorse. However, as an organization, endorse one candidate over another. A church may not give its money to one candidate over another. This also violates 501c3. And so there are tight restrictions on the churches as far as they can't endorse, they can't give money. And so in that, there's this balance, right? They use these restrictions as, a scapegoat for them because they say, oh, well, if we, talk about the Democratic Party in a negative way, we do this or we do that, the government's going to come after us and they're going to take our money from us. They're going to take our tax exemption from us. And so they've gotten into this place where they say, we're just going to give context. We're just going to, let you guys decide. We're going to do this. And they've denied themselves the right as leaders, these pastors they have, denied themselves as rights as leaders to be able to lead, to be able to lead by example in the churches, because they've taken this tax exemption, this money, and they're afraid to lose it. And so in this article, I want to read it because it's interesting. The article goes on to say, and this is supposedly the Christian Post, so I don't know if they're a 501c3 either, but in the American system of government, the government is of the people, by the people, and for the people. So showing respect for the authority in the United States includes us being active part of the process and voting. In other words, we can show love for both God and country by consciously participating in our Republican form of government. Part of the bargain of living in liberty is a duty to vote and making our voices heard in the public square. This election season, we encourage every religious American to vote according to their conscience and their values. Every person of faith should know this. Protecting religious freedoms and all our God-given liberties isn't just a battle that we're fighting in the courtroom. It's a fight we can also win if we show up at the ballot box. And so I understand the point they're making here, but even in this article, it's always just the fact that boggles my mind that Christians, Christian medias, Christian all these things, they're so timid to come out and openly speak out against one platform over the other. When it is obvious to anyone with two sets of eyes that the Democratic platform is by far way more wicked and anti-Christian than the Republican platform in many ways, shape, and form. And it's okay to admit that the Republican Party has errors. I do that all the time. But it's not okay to just act like they're both the same. Looking here, I want to pull up a video here. And this is really kind of the crux of my issue with the church. I think that this summarizes everything that I find really, really despicable about what the church has become. Let's pull up a video here. This is of Andy Stanley. Now, Andy Stanley is a very famous pastor who is famous for saying a lot of things while saying nothing simultaneously. So here's a video of Andy Stanley speaking about, the election. And he's speaking about how, people have made it to where, if you're a Democrat, you can't be a true Christian. So let's pull up this video and let's take a look.
Political affiliation has become the litmus test for orthodoxy. I hope you haven't seen this, but let me just tell you, what I'm about to tell you is not kind of off in a corner. This is mainline speaking and posting, and books are written and chapters of books are written about this. Right now, the current thing for the last 3 or 4 years is that you can't, in fact, I was gonna put this on the screen, but there are things I should never put on a screen to have a picture taken because, anyway, so You know what the messaging is now? This isn't in the corner. These are, if I named the people who are saying these things, you've heard of most of them. You've read some of their books. That you can't be a Christian and be a Democrat. You can't possibly be a true Christian if you're a Democrat, which is absolutely absurd. But what's even more absurd is as conservative Christians, Republicans, demonize Democrats, all Democrats, and you can't possibly be a Christian, as they demonize Democrats, they basically go against one of Jesus' primary teachings. Instead of loving their enemies, all these lost Democrats, they demonize them. They make Democrats the enemy. And what did Jesus tell us to do with our enemies? Anybody remember? Yeah. So let me just say to those of you who are conservative politically like me, if you do that, stop it. You can disagree, but you don't write somebody off as bad and evil. Here's why. You think it's just kind of funny. You study history. All that has to happen in any country is for a majority to decide a minority is evil. And once they're evil, they're cockroaches and they're rats. And once they're evil, the only thing to do with evil, you don't redeem evil. You don't share your faith with evil. You get rid of evil. That language is so extraordinarily harmful.
The only thing absurd, Andy, is the fact that people still take you seriously as a church leader. This is nothing new from him. He's gone off the deep end in a lot of subjects, but, Andy fails to make the point that, yes, it is wrong. And I don't doubt that there are people out there who do demonize and dehumanize people, call them cockroaches, whatever, of those sorts. There's nothing wrong with that. But the thing that shocks me with someone like Andy Stanley is that they can blatantly stand up there, make these points, and they can fail to address the deeper issue. The deeper issue is that the Democratic Party platform endorses and promotes values that are fundamentally opposed to Christians and to Christianity. He avoids discussing the troubling reality that these values that they have are so anti-Christian that they deserve to be called out. And of course, he would never call them out because doing so would require a willingness to have courage and also a willingness to be politically incorrect. This is why I said it's very convenient. He says so many things without actually saying anything at all. He tells his congregation it's wrong for conservatives to call Democrats evil. The church needs to acknowledge that what they believe is evil. Okay, the people themselves may be misled. Let's consider these policies. The endorsement of abortion, the promotion of gender ideology, that includes castrating children and giving them drugs and taking them away from their parents in many forms. Identity politics, which seeks to divide our country by class and race. These are the positions that the Democratic Party platform embraces openly, and each one stands opposed to biblical values. To deny this is to deny the truth of God's word. Let's look at Jesus' life and ministry, okay? Let's take his example. Okay, Jesus was very strongly opposed to those who misled individuals in the faith. Take, for example, the Pharisees in the temple. Jesus cared very deeply for the sinners, the tax collectors, those who were misled by these religious and political leaders. He spoke boldly and courageously, often using strong language towards the Pharisees, challenging them openly. We should follow that example, Andy. That is the best approach towards our culture. We should be able to speak out strongly against the Democratic platform and their leadership, which includes their candidates. The leaders of the Democratic Party know exactly what they're doing. They're manipulating Americans, often for money, fame, and political gain. And on that note, we'll continue on that point, but to prove that to you, that they're manipulating and trying to take advantage of this, I want to read this article to you. So, there was an article written, and this article was back in, it was back in 2019, and this article came from the New Yorker, and the point of the article was that Democrats were being taught how to speak evangelical. And so the whole point of this article was that Democrat congressmen, congresspeople were learning to speak the evangelical lingo. They're learning to reach out to evangelicals. And were they doing it because they love evangelicals? They believe in Christianity. They believe Jesus is risen. He's their Lord and Savior? Definitely not. They're doing it because they want their votes and they want to corrupt the church because they know that the church is supposed to be the stronghold between their values and actually implementing them and getting into the White House. On a Tuesday afternoon this past summer, Doug Pagitt, a 35-year-old pastor in a blue straw hat and glasses, stood in a conference room at the Democratic Congressional Committee's office in Washington, D.C. Laying out sandwiches, Pagitt was preparing to lead a training session for Democratic members of Congress on how to speak to evangelicals. A table was littered with blue and orange lapel pins reading "Vote Common Good," the name of an organization that Pagitt launched last year to make the religious left more visible. We want people to know that it exists. And they can join it, he said. Last year, the group's members spent a month traveling the country in a tour bus, campaigning for roughly 40 progressive candidates on their religious message, but this was their first time speaking to politicians in Washington. 5 members of the group took seats around the conference table, some wearing blazers and sensible sandals. Pagitt generally projects an air of ease, but this afternoon he was anxious. Today is pretty much a beta test, he said. A few minutes later, Marcy Kaptur, a Democrat from Ohio, who at 73 is the longest-serving woman in the House of Representatives, arrived wearing a seafoam jacket. Soon after, the Representative Catherine Clark from Massachusetts, and then it goes on to list all these people who came in, all these Democratic leaders, and then the person leading this group starts off with, try to memorize John 3:16 in the car on your way to the event, and then quote that is probably not the best way to connect with faith-based voters, he said. He had seen a candidate try this trick on the way to a rally in Kansas and then struggled to remember the phrase on stage. So the whole point of this article is that this evangelical pastor, leader, whoever it is teaching the Democratic Party platitudes and phrases that they can remember so that they can just spew them to the evangelical people they're talking to seem more evangelical. If we are stupid enough as Christians and followers of people like Andy Stanley are stupid enough to think that these people actually care about your faith and your values, then it's safe to say that we need to be a little more educated. I'll put it that way to keep it light. With all that, what do we do about this? How do we address the Andy Stanleys of the world, the people who don't care about, Christian values, that claim to be Christian yet don't listen to anything that Jesus spoke about, that don't care about, children being castrated, that don't care that babies are being killed in the womb? Well, something that I think is very clear, and I think the Apostle Paul is our perfect example for this, is our ability to use our mouths and our words. It's a shocking thing, I know, but we actually have the ability to speak out. We have the ability to say, hey, I don't agree with you. Hey, you're lying. Or, hey, that's actually not what the Word of God says. Or, hey, you as a pastor are failing your church. Or we can call out churches directly and say, hey, you as a church, you failed. You failed us by not performing your civic duty. You are failing by not caring about the unborn. And we need more of that. We need bold, courageous leaders who will stand up to this. And I was really discouraged about something I watched. And I'm going to play it for you guys here because I think that it's significant enough to play. Now, let me pull up the video here. We'll watch it and then we will react to this. So I'm going to pull up this video here. This includes some prominent people that you guys may or may not know. One of them is Charlie Kirk. And it's an example of something that I take problem with and something that I think needs to change. And it's an attitude that we need to be okay with and we need to grow into this. So let's pull up this video here and let's react to this.
But let me tell you, just voting early is not enough. You need to go find people that have not yet voted before Tuesday, everybody. This needs to be an activation where you say, you know what? For no other reason, we need to defeat 139 in this state. I don't need to dwell on this too much. What Mark is saying, this would make Arizona the most radical abortion state in the country. It would allow abortion up until the moment of birth for minors without parental consent. Now, mind you, without saying any other names, there's a big church in the valley that you all know named CCV.
No.
Oh, am I not allowed to do this? Oh, okay. All right.
No, we love them. We're on Team Jesus.
All right, sorry.
Shots fired, shots pulled back.
Okay,
all right,
sorry.
I love you.
Well, no, I mean, I'm just saying they have not spoke against 139. I'm sorry, I'm a guest here. I shouldn't do that. You're right. So anyway, vote biblically, and thanks for having me.
Yeah.
When I first saw that video, the first thing that came to my mind was what's going on there. Kudos to that church for having the guts to have conservative political people and candidates on the stage and speaking at the church. That's already more than most. Okay, and I 100% acknowledge that and give credit to that. That is a great thing, and more churches should do that. But when it came to the point where Charlie got there and he said, there's a church out there that isn't doing its job, and we need to acknowledge that. Especially on a proposition like Prop 139 here in Arizona that legalized abortion up until 24 weeks. Not allowing Charlie Kirk to finish his sentence and to be able to acknowledge that for whatever reason, whether it's church politics or just because you like them and you're friends with them, it's truly a disservice to the congregants and towards people who need to be informed about those realities. And it's good for churches to stand boldly against other churches in that sense. And so that right there is an example of something that we need to grow out of. We need to be able to grow out of being afraid or being timid or just, not wanting to ruffle those feathers. Of course, it's easy, and this is kind of where I differ in many areas in the sense of, there are people out there who can easily speak out against, the Democratic platform and say, oh yeah, Democrats are radical, this, and that, right? But it's uncomfortable to have to be introspective and to actually speak out against other churches. If you are a church, right, and you're a church leader, and you only speak out against the Democratic Party platform, that's great. That's already more than most people are doing. But how does that effectuate change to the church as a whole? We need to be like the Apostle Paul. We need to be able to look to other churches. The Apostle Paul boldly and outspokenly said, Corinthians, the church at Corinth, you guys are stinking it up. You guys are a disaster heap. And he said, when I get there, the man who's been doing these things, the guy who was sleeping with his dad's wife, he says, when I get there, I'm taking that guy and I'm handing him over to Satan. That is strong language. And he was rough and he was hard. But even at the end of the day, he didn't even apologize for being rough and confronting them and being bold and courageous to call them out on their sin. He did it openly, and he did it in a way in which that was clear and you had no doubt what he was saying. But the Apostle Paul did that out of love. And this is what people like Andy Stanley don't understand. You can call out other Christians. You can call out people who are Christians and supposedly support Democrats. You can call them out in love. Be charitable in the way you do it, but you have to be outspoken. You have to speak on these things. And now, because we failed to do so, here in Arizona and many other states, we have babies who will be killed because of it. We have lives that have been jeopardized because we as Christians are too afraid to speak out against other Christians for the fear of backlash, persecution, or losing notoriety or popularity amongst other Christians and church conflict. It's sad, and it's something that I hope we as Christians can outgrow if we desire to preserve this amazing country. Charlie Kirk had the right idea. I hope that we can have more conversations like this. We can have open dialogue. And I hope that we can make a true difference for the church. Because if the church goes to the wayside, this country won't be too far behind it. So thank you for watching and or listening. That'll do it for our show today. Don't forget to check us out on all your platforms. And if you haven't already, like and subscribe. And if you're watching on our website, thank you so much for tuning in. And don't forget to stay principled.